All right, and I'm so sorry about that. Hopefully, that did something. I do apologize if there are any audio issues. Please do let me know. So hopefully this should have done something, and of course it kind of looks like it did. All right, so picking up where we left off with the Zoom housekeeping. Of course, many of you know the housekeeping rules already. But if you want to ask any questions, please use the Q&A function. And my colleagues Desiree, Juan, and Carla are going to be in the back end answering anything you folks might have. And of course, we'll also have some polls. You'll see them pop up on your screen, and I'm going to share the results once everyone has voted. Alrighty, folks. And of course, our mission here at the Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. All right, so let's get started. Now, the American Civil War has, of course, played a defining role in shaping American history in the mid-19th century. Here in New York City, the war was a hot-button issue that dominated all aspects of everyday life, as you might imagine. Starting in 1861 and then continuing through the next 4 years, thousands of young New Yorkers from all backgrounds would make their way from the city's parade grounds and training camps to fight for the Union cause. And while Central Park was still under construction during those crucial years, it's important to note that the war had a much more lasting impact on the park than anyone would have guessed. So let's go ahead and take a look at the map right now. And we'll take a look at where we're going to be for today. So we're going to make our way from 59th Street and 5th Avenue, and we're going to end off at Sheep Meadow, or rather just over Sheep Meadow, rather. And we'll also take a look at statues, buildings, and landscapes that are still in the park and honor Civil War veterans. All right, so we begin here at the southwest corner, or rather the southeast corner, at Grand Army Plaza, which serves as one of the main entrances. And of course, dominating this plaza is the statue of one of the war's most famous heroes. This is General William Tecumseh Sherman. Now, Sherman was unveiled on the spot in 1903, and it actually represents one of the last great works by the famed American sculptor, Augustus St. Gaudens. In addition to depicting this great general on horseback, St. Gaudens also added the figure of Nike, who's the Greek goddess of victory, as she leads Sherman. And as you all can see, he then gilded the entire thing with 24-karat gold leaf, in keeping with the grandiosity of the monument. Now, Sherman is located here on such a prominent location since he was well known as one of the more effective military commanders on the northern side. And he's often credited with helping to end the war. So he basically led Union troops to victory in the last few months of the conflict, essentially capturing the city of Atlanta, Georgia in the summer of 1864, before embarking on a very devastating march to the port of Savannah along the coast. Now, after the war, Sherman moved to New York City, where he was actually frequently seen riding the bridle trail around Central Park. Now, after he died, city officials had plans to put up his statue at Riverside Park, right near the tomb of President Ulysses S. Grant. But Sherman's family, not really wanting their relative to be overshadowed by his former boss, they instead insisted on Central Park. And of course, that is where he remains to this very day. All right, so let's go ahead and continue north, and we're going to pass the sandstone walls into the park right now. By the way, the path ahead of us is called Ween Walk, and that'll lead us towards the zoo. So heading in through these gates now, and let's go ahead and see what's in store for us right now. Right up the pathway, we come to the Arsenal building. And as we've learned in previous weekly walks, this actually predates Central Park by almost a decade. Today, it houses the headquarters of the New York City Parks Department. So you'll often see Parks employees going in and out of this incredible, massive building. But of course, it's also seen a variety of different uses throughout its time. So as you might expect with the name Arsenal, initially, the building was supposed to serve as the munitions depot for the state of New York. So it was actually completed back in 1850, and it held weapons and ammunition until the city came and took it over for use of the park. it never really saw any official military action during the Civil War, since fighting only started just a few years after it was decommissioned. But militia drills and marches could sometimes be seen here along the area, especially during the 1860s when the park was under construction. Now, the main entrance of the arsenal actually reflects this military connection. To me, it's always fun to point out certain details like all the drums, the cannonballs, the muskets, the sabers. It's basically like a constant reminder of the arsenal's original intended usage as an actual military structure. Now, here in this Harper's Weekly cartoon from 1866, you can see that the building at one point was also the home of the Central Park Menagerie, which was the precursor to the zoo. Now, back in those days, the menagerie didn't really quite have the same logistical capacities as most modern day zoos. So large animals like lions and bears were actually sometimes kept in cages in the basement of the arsenal building. So yeah, that was probably a very incredible moment in the arsenal building's history. Also, it didn't help that citizens were also donating exotic animals to the park, left and right, including 3 African Cape buffalo donated by General Sherman right after the war. Over time, however, the menagerie would grow and expand to the modern day zoo that we're all familiar with. All right, so moving on, and we're going to pass underneath this archway carrying the 65th Street Transverse Road, and that's going to lead us into our next landscape for the day. So after a brisk walk through the Dean, we end off right here at the south end of the mall. This is what's called Literary Walk. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of the features here. Now, anchoring this end of the promenade, we come to what's called the Olmsted Flower Bed, which was unveiled in 1972 for Frederick Law Olmsted's 150th birthday. Now, you might see a bunch of different flowers and plantings here that change with the season, but usually things like phlox, tulips, azaleas, those are pretty common to be found here. Now, while we might usually think of Olmsted as a landscape architect who, of course, designed parks, during the war, he actually held a very important high-level job for the federal government. So in 1861, at the outbreak of the conflict, like so many Americans, Olmsted was very eager to serve his country. But due to a carriage accident a year before, Olmsted really wasn't able to secure a combat role. However, being a very popular public figure with plenty of experience as an administrator, Olmsted got the job of Secretary of the United States Sanitary Commission, whose main task was caring for Union Army troops and veterans. So Olmsted only served for about 2 years until 1863, but the Sanitary Commission played a vital role in caring for these soldiers and raising the morale of troops. It's often said that Olmsted himself supervised medical staff, he helped distribute supplies, and even treated wounded soldiers. Most fascinating of all is that he did all this with little to no experience in combat, save for maybe a few years out on the sea, which I don't think really actually counts. So in addition to giving us some of the finest parks in the country, Olmsted literally saved thousands of lives during the Civil War. It should also be noted that even before the Civil War itself, Olmsted's opposition to slavery had already been well established. So just before working on Central Park, for instance, Olmsted was working as a journalist, and he traveled all around the South, eventually writing this scathing anti-slavery news piece for what would later become the New York Times. So definitely a man of many hats indeed. And right by the Olmsted flower bed, we come to the statue of William Shakespeare, which was unveiled here on the spot in 1872. Now, Shakespeare stands in an area called Literary Walk amongst several other graceful statues of playwrights, poets, and other novelists, most of which were added in the years just after the Civil War. This particular statue was created by John Quincy Adams Ward, who was quite well known as the Dean of American Sculptors by the mid-19th century. Believe it or not, the Shakespeare statue actually has a very fascinating connection to the Civil War. So if you look off to the side, and I do know it's kind of hard to read here, but you'll see that the pedestal was actually presented just a few years before the statue was placed here on the anniversary of Shakespeare's birth on April 23rd, 1864. During that year, a fundraiser was actually held for the statue, and that was held downtown at the Winter Garden Theater, during which several prominent actors took the stage and performed Julius Caesar to a sold-out crowd. And those famous actors were the Booth brothers. There was Edwin Booth, Junius Booth, and John Wilkes Booth over on the left-hand side. Now, you folks might recognize that name as President Abraham Lincoln's assassin, who shot him in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. a year later. But before that fateful moment in history, however, Booth was actually a well-known stage actor, and he played the role of Mark Antony in 1864, while his older brothers played Brutus and Cassius in a performance to raise funds for the creation of the statue. And just up ahead, we can see the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument depicting Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Now, all three were actually New Yorkers, and in addition to their roles in fighting for equal representation for women across the country, they were also active during the Civil War in the fight against slavery. In fact, in the 1860s, these three women could actually be seen around the city making speeches, raising funds for union organizations, and helping to recruit troops. In fact, Sojourner Truth herself met President Abraham Lincoln in the White House in 1864 for her efforts with the National Freedmen's Relief Association. And that meeting is actually depicted here in this illustration from around that time period. Unfortunately, the original painting, which this illustration is based out of, that actually was lost in a fire at some point in the 19th century. Now, like most other Americans, she also had a very direct connection to the war. So her grandson actually enlisted in the legendary 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which is often recognized as one of the most highly decorated Black military units in the entire course of the war. So the valiant efforts of the 54th Massachusetts, especially during the Battle of Fort Wagner, really helped inspire hundreds of thousands of African-American men to enlist for the Union cause. And of course, of those many brave individuals, one of them was the grandson of Sojourner Truth. All right, folks, so we're going to go ahead and move on now. From the mall, we're going to make our way west. And along the way, you might actually notice some new plantings, including this elm tree just off towards the side. With so many American elms lining the mall, it's important for us to replace the older trees with younger ones so they may live on into the next several generations. And just a few steps away, we come to Sheep Meadow. Very popular, of course, in the summertime when it swells up with large, massive crowds. However, even though the meadow today is one of the most popular spots in the park to meet up with friends, there was actually a time when the Sheep Meadow was strictly for the usage of the military. So the Greensward Plan from 1858 actually calls for this large, open, expansive green to be used as the parade ground. And it was supposed to be used by members of the military for doing things like conducting drills, marches, and other military parades. So here's one such example of a park in use as a parade ground during that time period. So this is actually Washington Square Park, just a little bit further downtown. But if you can imagine a scene similar to this one taking place at Sheep Meadow, this is what you might have found in the early years of the park. Now, drills and marches like these were a very regular occurrence, and since there was a war going on by 1861, that of course was understandable. However, this was all to the annoyance of folks like Olmsted, who actually preferred Central Park to be quiet and not full of all the noise from all the soldiers, the marches, the drills that were happening. Remember, he wanted Central Park to be a naturalistic paradise, as an escape away from the hustle and bustle of city life. So in 1864, near the end of the Civil War, city officials, most likely very much influenced by Olmsted, they then closed off the parade ground to all humans, including militia groups, bringing in a flock of around 200 Southdown sheep. And these sheep would remain here for the next 70 years, giving rise to the name Sheep Meadow. Eventually, these sheep themselves were removed from Central Park, and nowadays you're more likely to encounter people sunbathing or perhaps maybe picnicking here instead of any soldiers or any sheep. All right, and moving on now, and let's make our way through what's called Nell Singer Lilac Walk, named in 1970 after a local philanthropist. Now, these lilacs were planted to add a bit of color to the northeastern edges of Sheep Meadow, and they're usually in bloom from late summer, or rather late spring into early summer. So you might see a variety of different colors throughout the season. Overall, these blooms really add a pop of color to the otherwise green landscape. All right, folks, so right now I think it is time for us to go ahead and conduct our poll of the day. So let's go ahead and do that right now. All right, and since of course we are celebrating a belated Memorial Day weekend, and we're also celebrating the start of summer, right now I wanted to ask, do you folks have any favorite ways of spending Memorial Day or perhaps Memorial Day weekend? Now, of course, everyone has vastly different ways of celebrating this holiday. Now, some folks might commemorate with barbecues, cookouts, or perhaps maybe picnics in their local park. Others might go to the beach or perhaps go for a little hike. Many people might even attend a Memorial Day service honoring veterans, especially if they have family members in the military. I myself like to spend a nice quiet day at home with family, maybe do a small cookout. I do also have plenty of family members in the Navy, so sometimes they'll come and visit, and we'll do something nice and fun for them. All right, folks, let's go ahead and see what everybody here says. So let's end off the poll, and let's share the results. All right, so it looks like, as I expected, a good majority of you like to go to barbecues, cookouts, and of course, you also like to go hiking in nature. Definitely one of the more fun moments in the early summer months. So let's go ahead now and continue on with our tour. And let's go ahead and move on now towards the next few stops. So from here, we're going to cross West Drive, and we're going to make our way towards the last stop on our weekly walk. So just directly across the drive, we come to the 7th Regiment Memorial. Now, the memorial was dedicated in the park back in 1874. And it actually honors the 58 Civil War casualties of the 7th Regiment of the New York State Militia, which was among the first to respond to Lincoln's call for troops in 1861. Now, the 7th was well known as the Silk Stocking Regiment because it attracted a number of young men from the city's upper classes, especially from places like Fifth Avenue and Midtown as well. In fact, the roster from the 7th Regiment included famous last names like Lefferts, Vanderbilt, Tiffany, Van Buren, and Hamilton, amongst many, many, many other famous names. Now, one name that art enthusiasts might recognize is Sanford Gifford. Gifford was a New York City-based artist who specialized in large, stunning landscape painting. So he was a member of the Hudson River School, some of which actually served as inspiration for Central Park's naturalistic design. So here's Mr. Gifford in 1861. Gifford served in the 7th Regiment for 2 years, during which time he was then sent to help defend Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Now, after the war, Gifford continued with his art, and his renditions of the Catskill Mountains, the forests of New England, and the New Jersey shore are today recognized as some of the finest in American art. Now, like so many other veterans, the Civil War affected him greatly. So landscapes like this one, which depicts Hunter Mountain near his home in upstate New York, these paintings really highlight the somber attitude of the country at that point in time. Gifford himself actually lost 2 brothers during the war, and he would sometimes come here to the same view to reflect on life. All right, folks, so we made it to the last stop on our walk, and we're going to go ahead and end things off here with this lovely, very, very beautiful, incredible painting. But I do want to thank you all so much for joining us on another weekly walk through Central Park. Now, don't forget to check out some of our upcoming tours as well. This month, we have our Pride Tour, which highlights just some of the many names and accomplishments from members of the LGBTQ community here in Central Park. So please see the link in the chat for more information. But otherwise, I do thank you all so much for joining me. From everyone here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well. Have a good day, folks.